Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm just going to go through some slides from our coaches course, and I think it's going to be a really good idea for you guys to understand exactly the kind of material we're going to be going through, so you have an idea of the kind of content and the way we're going to present the course, so that if you're looking to do a coaches course and you're looking to understand more about weightlifting, at least this material gives you an understanding of what we're actually going to be going through. If you're not aware, the course is on July 17, and it's a Sunday, and it's going to be face-to-face. So we're going to be going through the movements, snatch, clean, jerk, and we're going to be working through a lot of the conceptual ideas around training and weightlifting. We're going to be going through some programming material, and there'll be a little preview to this programming content as well. In this video here, we're just going to be going through technique. So I think technique's a really important part of weightlifting, and it's something that is very conceptual. So having a really good lens to view technique is something that's really important as a coach, especially if you're just getting into weightlifting. There can be a lot of people who are very strong and very good at weightlifting talking about the movement and in very absolute terms, that this is the way you move and this is what a good movement looks like. Now, good and bad is kind of something we want to try and stay away from, because with technique, everything's pretty much gray. And you probably know that with training, everything's pretty gray. So we're just going to go through that now, and we'll go through a few of the slides together so you guys can get an understanding of the kind of material we're going to be presenting on that Sunday. So what is technique? Well, when we're talking about technique, it is very conceptual, like I said, but basically all we're doing is performing a series of movements in a specific sequence to produce a certain goal or task, or complete a certain task. Now, I know that sounds like I didn't really say much, but basically we want to make sure that if we teach someone something, when they approach the bar in the context of weightlifting, they're going to do the thing that they set out to do. So if I teach you how to do a snatch, if I let you do the snatch and I've taught you some specific techniques about it, when you approach the bar and when it gets heavier, I have an idea of the things that you're going to do. You're not just going to bend over and rip the bar and not get under it, or press it out, or do something crazy that doesn't really resemble a snatch. You're going to perform the movement in a specific sequence that will look different for pretty much everyone, but it'll have some defining features. And when we talk about technique, there's a lot of conceptual things that go into it, but hopefully that gives you an understanding or a definition with regards to technique. So when we're talking about technique, it's really important to understand that this is biased towards the coach and the athlete. So that's biased to you. And if you're an athlete, it's obviously there's certain biases that you'll want to move, or certain ways you'll want to move, because that's probably going to be quite strong for you, or a way that you produce force best. So when we're understanding that, we need to be aware that as a coach, if we're talking about technique and how it's biased towards us, then we need to understand that how we move might not be the same way that all our clients move. So just because I have a very vertical pull, for example, doesn't mean that everyone powers through that stance and that position. So that second pull doesn't mean everyone can just stay over the bar for a very long time and then drive straight up. Some people might have to lean back a little bit and delay knee extension in a slightly different way and move through different positions. Or just because my hips stay relatively, or my back angle stays relatively constant off the floor, it doesn't mean that it's wrong if your knees can extend quite a bit off the floor and then you sweep the bar in later. That's just how you're going to be producing force and moving the bar off the ground. So a lot of these things are very individual, as the slides say. So all the things in yellow are going to be really important for you to remember. And like I said, it considers the individual. So when we're looking at technique, we need to be aware of someone might have different leverages to us, someone might have prior injuries, and that's going to influence the way that they move through key positions. Now, it's also goal and task dependent. So that means that if someone's competing for a comp and we're going to hold them to comp standards, that's something that I would say is goal or task dependent. Now, if the weight's really heavy, then the body just wants to complete the rep. Your body doesn't really care about staying over the bar or what good technique looks like. So if the knees have to come in order to stand up, then the knees will do that. And there's things like that we need to be aware of. And there's obviously lots of things and questions that you might have around technique, and we'll work through those together. But you just need to be aware that those variables, and there are lots of them, will influence technique. So as coaches, what is our job? Well, our job is to make sure that we're putting people in positions that they feel are the strongest for them. So we don't really want to be trying to go down a path of getting someone into a position that's really weak and may detrain them or not allow for a certain amount of intensity or volume to go into that position. There are times where that might be a good idea. And if someone's really struggling with a specific thing, it's good to experiment and try and find new ways of how we'll resolve that. But it's important to be aware that there are lots of tools and cues that you can use to resolve the technique changes you want. We want to still try and load that position as much as we can. Technique doesn't really look like stripping the bar back to the empty barbell or broomstick for 5 years and then rebuilding certain positions until it looks perfect in your eyes. There's lots of things we can do, and we'll chat more about that later. Like I said earlier, as far as leading to predictable results, that's what I touched on earlier when I said when you approach the bar, it looks like a snatch or it's going to be a snatch. So we need to be aware of that. So the technique that we use, we need to make sure it's consistent and it's repeatable, which is going to lead to more predictable strength outcomes. So if we teach you how to squat or we teach you how to snatch, you're actually going to be able to load that variation. You're going to be able to push that variation over the course of the training block, which is going to lead to hopefully lifting more weight. So that's something that you need to be aware of. Now, this is just a simple flow chart of a few things that we're going to be mentioning and going through. So obviously technique depends on all these variables. So your technique will obviously change as you get fatigued or as the load increases, and we'll go through a quick slide on that later. But if you train yourself and you do weightlifting or powerlifting, or maybe you do another sport, you'll be aware that when you're tired, your lifting looks a little bit different. And when you get fatigued, you might recruit other areas in order to complete the lift. And that leads into self-organization. So the body's very, very good at completing the task. However, or whichever way it'll do that, it's up to the body and it'll work that out. So that means, like I mentioned earlier, when you get really, really tired and you need to just stand up out of a squat, your body might cave forward once your quads give out in a front squat or a clean. In order to stand up, it'll start recruiting other areas in order to complete the lift. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have a weakness in that area. It's actually recruiting those areas in order to complete the lift. So another good example is in a split jerk, if you dip and drive and you split and you lunge a little bit deeper or you land a little bit deeper and you get pushed down, your body's just self-organizing to receive at a deeper position. It doesn't mean that you need to train that position and go to that position all the time. Your body's smart enough to work that out, and it can perform multiple tasks and think multiple things at once a lot faster than we can, or we can consciously think of them. The next is techniques obviously biased towards comp standards. So someone's competing, we want to make sure that their technique is looking pretty sharp and can pass and can get white lights or white flags. So we want to make sure that they're not pressing their lifts out, they're not receiving on their chest and then going to their front rack, that the lifts look pretty smooth, there's a distinct one motion, there's no stopping, and we're abiding by those comp rules. The only thing to touch the ground are our feet. We're not landing on our knees and coming back up. So those standards need to be aware, and if you are a coach, you want to be aware of those standards if you are getting your athletes to do comp reps. Then there's how loadable this position is. So if we're going to be training someone and we're going to be making technique changes, we want to be aware that if we do make changes to this, can this position hold up in terms of, can we put it through more volume? Can we put it through more weight? So if we change someone's setup position and then we allow them to recruit slightly different areas because we think that it will lead to a better first pull, we need to be aware that that might take time. And if they get fatigued, then it's likely that they'll revert back to a position they feel most comfortable or that they were previously using. The next is injuries or pain. So obviously, if you've ever had an injury yourself, or you've ever had a little bit of niggles or tendonitis or any of those things, you'll be aware that you might try and guard or protect that area, or if you're in a little bit of pain, you might move a little bit slower because your body's just stopping you from being super explosive and hurting yourself. So we do have that protective mechanism there. So if your athlete is in pain or they are injured, you'll be able to tell pretty quickly because their technique will definitely not look like how it normally does. And then lastly, when we're talking about throwing stuff overhead and dropping barbells, we want to make sure that it's safe. So understanding safety is going to be a really big rock in teaching weightlifting, and we're going to make sure that before we smash them with volume and give them lots and lots of snatches and lots of clean and jerks, that they can actually complete them quite competently without too much coaching from yourself and without giving them every little bit of cues or every little bit of information about the lift in order to complete it. And then the next thing I want to touch on is things change when we add load. So this is a really important thing to understand and wrap your head around, is basically when we add load, our center of mass will change. For intensive purposes for our coaches course, just think that the center of mass is pretty much where the barbell is. So when things get heavier, obviously our center of mass mass is going to be more dependent on where the barbell's placed, and that's going to change how we're going to perform the lift. Understanding that when we go heavier, say in an overhead squat, they might actually find it easier to fall into that bottom position, or they might find it easier to balance. A really good example of this is Dmitry Klokov. So you can see on the left, hopefully it's not too pixelated for you. It's a pretty bad and old photo. It's Dmitry Klokov going into a horrible looking overhead squat, but it's the FMS, I think, overhead squat test. And now, if you can perform an overhead squat with the broomstick, awesome. My overhead squat probably looks a lot like Dimitri's if I'm trying to go that deep. But you can see that when he's moving 200 kilos overhead, and this is his 200 hang snatch, that the position's completely different. He's got all the weight now behind him, or pretty much where the bar is. So his center of mass is a lot higher. And then he's able to use that weight to help him balance, and he's able to find a nice upright position. So you can see that things change and the load changes. So when the load changes, it makes it a lot easier for us to balance. And as a result, we're not going to fall over. So I think that's a really important way to view technique. I think we'll leave it at that as far as looking at technique, and hopefully that gives you a good understanding of the way in which we're going to be approaching technique in our course. And it's going to give you a really good understanding of how weightlifting works and how things will change as people get heavier, and how everyone will move slightly differently, but there are defining features in those lifts that are going to be really important, and that's where we'll focus our attention on when we're coaching and giving feedback to our clients. So if you have any questions about the course, you have any questions about the material, I look forward to hearing them from you guys. Leave them in the comments below or send me a DM on Instagram. Otherwise, we're going to get stuck into part 2, which is just a little bit of a snippet of programming. Thanks so much, guys, for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.